Okay, next, let's talk about agriculture in Africa. This is a figure from an older textbook showing the different types of land use. And here, what we have is something called shifting cultivation. Shifting cultivation is something we mentioned in the talk on the Amazon, but I'll go over that. And we also have things like nomadic herding and also plantations. We've talked a bit about plantation agriculture in the past in South America. And until we get down here, you have more sort of what are called Mediterranean farming, things that we would probably recognize in California. So just a review on a little bit about tropical environments. That in tropical environments, again, like the A climates near the equator, you have rich surface soil right near the top, but you have poor soil quality underneath. That you don't have rich quality soil, generally speaking, in the tropics, because the nutrients are really absorbed very quickly and washed away in tropical areas. And so deforestation is an issue in tropical areas. And when it comes to agriculture, a lot of what's practiced is types of subsistence agriculture, particularly one called shifting cultivation, sometimes also called slash and burn. This is where people will clear out a small clearing in the rainforest, grow foods for their own consumption, and then over time, as the soil quality is reduced. By the way, the reason they burn the vegetation is to add some nutrients to the soil. However, there's a time limit on how long the soil can stay productive. Over time, it becomes less and less productive, and people have to move on and start new clearing somewhere else. So here, this is a clearing in the rainforest where food is out of there and moved perhaps to a different area. Now, the impact to the forest depends on how many people are doing it. It's not that many people, low population, the impacts can be quite small. However, in Africa, the populations are higher than they are in the Amazon rainforest. And so here, because of the higher population, the impacts can be much more severe. This is an area that had been forested at one time that has been extensively cleared for subsistence farming. So to recap, what we have in Africa is primarily subsistence agriculture. It's the dominant type that's mostly practiced. Again, we have soils, because this is a tropical region, we have soils that are not that productive when we clear the vegetation. So because of that, shifting agriculture is practiced, like this wide area, which is generally in the tropics. Some of the major crops include corn and yams, bananas, manioc. One thing noticeably missing from here is wheat. Wheat is something that grows in climates that are outside of the tropics, not so much inside of the tropics like here. So crops that are different than wheat, which is a major to the United States and Europe, not so much in Africa. And the other part of agriculture, an important part, is pastoralism or animal herding. One example is the Maasai people in Eastern Africa, who are completely dependent on their herds of cattle for the way they support themselves. It's an indispensable part of their culture. They subsist on milk, and even in case of blood from their farm animals for their livelihood. So here's an image of subsistence agriculture in Africa. People are growing some crops. And this next one is probably a little bit better for the full picture. You have a combination of sort of a large garden growing with food, but also a small herd of cattle. This is a bigger image of the Maasai people in East Africa, and they are completely dependent on pastoralism for making a living with their cattle. This is a figure from the book showing pens that are being cleared by the Maasai for helping to guard their cattle against other wildlife. And related to agriculture, I want to introduce a few other concepts that When we talk about how people use and own the land, this is called land tenure. And we have different traditions in Africa where there's more of a focus, there has been historically more of a focus on communal use than in Europe and the Americas, where private land is more of an accepted practice. And related to that, we have the concept of land alienation. This is where during the colonial period, land that had not been sort of specifically owned by, entitled by people, would be confiscated by the colonial powers. And this happened during the colonial period. There was, land seized from people, and it's still an issue today where sometimes governments will give away land to agribusiness or large corporate farms. And so this is considered a form of neo-colonialism or new colonialism that's still an issue in Africa as far as land tenure issues. Now, in Africa, most people work in the primary sector. This is a concept we talked about in North America, where one thing we talked about is most people in North America work here in the service sector, the tertiary sector. In Africa, we have a difference where most people are working in the primary sector, basic production, subsistence farming, for example, and some other types of extraction industries, fishing, mineral extraction, logging, and other things. The most important thing in this photo of this self-employed farmer is the cell phone that Africa developed without a lot of landlines, so communication had been quite difficult in Africa for a long time. And one thing that's really improved the economic conditions for many African farmers is the development of a cell phone network. This gives them access to not only voice, but also to internet as well. Fishing is an important part of the primary industries in Africa. And in some cases, mineral extraction, including oil and other natural resources. And one thing I want to highlight here, without going through all of them in particular, and natural resources in general. This has attracted a lot of attention from other parts of the world, including China, that China is becoming increasingly invested in parts of Africa, one for their natural resources, but two, as a new sort of place to establish business relationships. And so it varies by country, but there have been significant investments in parts of Africa by China over time. I'll include a video that kind of highlights some of these in particular. Now, one thing to note, though, on the difference between Chinese versus Western meaning European or the United States, is that China has different expectations for their business partners, that while the United States and Europe tend to establish conditions for trade like human rights, democracy, that type of thing, the Chinese tend to be more hands-off in their approach, more business-focused, where they're less concerned with issues such as human rights or democracy, but more focused on the benefits of trade between the two. And one thing to note about Africa as well, we tend to think of Africa as poor, but when you're starting from a low level, economic growth can be quite rapid. So some of these places, especially these like Angola and Ethiopia, have greater than 7% economic growth, which is quite high. The United States, we're happy if we get 2%. But when you're starting from a high level, achieving a high percentage growth rate is very difficult. Where when you're starting from the bottom, you have a lot of room to grow. And so a lot of the economies in Africa are actually growing quite rapidly, which is one thing that attracts investment from China, United States, and other parts of the world. One thing that Africa has going for it is that it has a young population and an increasingly well-educated young population, that the demographic issues that we see in Europe are not present in Africa because they have on average higher birth rates. So you have a overall younger population that's becoming increasingly better educated. Now, one of the disadvantages, though, is just the sheer size of Africa. That Africa is a very large place. These are examples of flight time between the southern part of Africa and Ethiopia. This is a 7-hour flight between these, and then from east to west, nearly 6-hour flight. The other thing is that railroads were not built to connect Africa together as they are in Europe. Railroads were built more for extractive purposes, like leading from the interior to the coast, not to connect country to country. So that's a disadvantage for transportation as well.